Hi friends, welcome to Law Chat with Girja. This is your legal BFF, Girja Bhargav Patel. Thank you for tuning in. I am so grateful for every single one of you for tuning in and listening, because this is what Law Chat is about. It's a place for you to be inspired, a place for you to gain some more wisdom and knowledge about your industry, but a place also where you can receive mentorship through storytelling. Thank you so much. Now, I know that before we walk into this next episode, whether you're tuning in through your iTunes or through other form of a podcast, or whether this is on YouTube, I would love for you to share this information with someone else, somebody who is your friend, your family, a colleague, somebody in your community, someone who can really be inspired by this as well and benefit from the information and from the stories that we're sharing with you today. Law Chat is to help the community, is to boost the community, is to inspire the community. And I want you to help me to do that. So thank you so much for that. Let's get started. Hi friends, welcome to Law Chat. We hear the buzzwords, diversity and inclusion, and some businesses have integrated in the last few years as we have seen it, or they've created a whole division dedicated to DEI. And they're trying to incorporate these things into their cultures, or we as individuals are trying to incorporate into our lifestyles or cultures as well. Whether we're doing it or whether we're trying to do it or whether we're pretending to do it, today's guest I have are super special, and I'm so excited to have them. I was having a hard time pressing record because I just couldn't stop talking myself about diversity and inclusion with them. Co-founders of Diversity Movement, Jackie Ferguson and Roxanne Bellamy, are going to be talking to us today about diversity and inclusion. They both, in their own rights, are experts in this area, and they have been working furiously with a lot of different companies since the inception back in 2019. Yeah. And I'm just so excited to have them. They are hosts to podcasts. Jackie is certified as a diversity expert. We have Rachel also, who is extremely knowledgeable. And I mean, the experience you ladies have, and I say you guys all the time because I'm from the Northeast originally, and that is
we'll talk about that one.
Yes,
Jackie too.
absolutely.
It was fine, but I'm just so honored to have you both here today and to talk to us and to share your knowledge, but also to share education with us, because I think we can all use it all the time and keep that out as we're going and moving along in life. So welcome to Law Chat.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. So fun.
Yeah. So, it's like I was saying earlier, this diversity and inclusion really became a hot topic in 2020, especially after a lot of things that happened, the incidents that happened in our society with, the different killings. And so that's when people actually started. I feel like in the summer of 2020 is when it really became something. And companies started creating divisions or started hiring somebody who can kind of spearhead that program into their business. But you both started this company 6 months before even the pandemic. So clearly, obviously, there was a need for this. And so how did that happen? And how did you guys come together to do this?
Well, a few of us endeavored to create a course. We worked at a marketing company, and we were endeavoring to create a course to help marketers be more inclusive in their marketing and how they thought about, consumers. And, because we've all seen terrible ads that clearly they didn't have diverse people reviewing those, right? And so that was our goal. To do that well, several of us got certified as certified diversity executives, and then we began to create this course. And at that point, I was the primary writer on the course. And one of the things that we touched on was inclusive language there. After creating the course, it really was responded well to by organizations that we were working with. And then they were asking, what's next? And so after taking the course, how do we begin to implement this? Like, now we have the education and the knowledge, but how do we implement this into our business? And so from there, we built the organization, and we're up to about 20 folks now. And we work in different aspects, from creating content to providing consulting to creating products through our organization that helps other organizations do well in the practice of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'll say, so I'm technically not a founder, but came on early in the process because as a freelance writer, Jackie reached out asking me to help her basically be the research fellow on this beautiful white paper she was doing called Say This, Not That, all about inclusive language, and really getting down to that functional, like, let's not talk about why inclusive language is important for too long. Let's talk about like, what do you want me to do? What are the actionable takeaways? And so we met through that. And then I joined the TDM team and it spiraled out from there. It turns out inclusive language in particular as a function of DEI is, and really as just like a function of being a human in the world, I think is really intriguing to people and really scary. And so it becomes a core offering of ours.
Yeah, I think it's really important also because language can make such a difference in the room that you're sitting in.
Absolutely.
We all talk. That's how we're engaging with one another. And of course, actions kind of reaffirm our talk, the narrative, but language is kind of where it starts. So it's really important that that's where you're focusing on as well. But before you started the diversity movement, did you have experiences where it kind of led you to this space today, led you to where you are today, where you're kind of like, yeah, that was just obviously when I look back, that was just a natural transgression to where I am today?
Well, Deirdre, I would say for me, coming from a multicultural family, I had to have those conversations in the house, right? Because I come from a multicultural, multi-generational, North, South, blue collar, white collar family. And so everything that happened in the world was seen through different lenses right around my dinner table. And so understanding how to process those different perspectives, how to speak to those different perspectives and get them to understand my point of view was an early competency that I developed. And then through my, 20 plus years in the corporate world, experiencing those microaggressions and things people said that really hit me wrong or offended me, I was looking for a way to make that easier for next generations a little bit, right? Make that process more fun, make them feel like they've got a better sense of belonging in the organizations. And there are certainly competencies that help with that, including inclusive language.
Absolutely.
I would say I am a writer by nature and by training, which I always forget to say, but all through, from middle school until I'm almost 40 now, of my life is centered around the way that I communicate, mostly in writing. And so I really love playing with the idea and the way that words create reality. And that drove home for me when my son was born almost 10 years ago, and I had to speak to him about things, right? And think about the way that I described other human beings and think about the way that I described other cultures and even just activities and events that would happen. And that's where my real intense focus on using the best terms and the most respectful terms, because he's going to emulate what I say, right?
Exactly.
And so how do I set a culture that says that's not an appropriate term for someone? Yes, I know all of your friends use that. I know grandma said it. I know it's on the news, wherever it came from, but that's not how we talk about humans in our house.
Oh gosh, that's so important. And yes, you're right. You are the managing editor at the diversity movement, and you also studied English, linguistics, and anthropology. I think it's so interesting because anthropology kind of goes into the civilization and why and what and how it all became. And I feel like that could just be a very long conversation about how we are here today and the things that have been happening. But, I know that in the summer of 2020, we had, of course, George Floyd and things that happened after that, like all the other stuff that kind of snowballed right after that. But you all started around 6 months before that. And so when you started your business at that time, was it hard? Was it accepted or was it welcome? Because at that time, a lot of people, and I could be totally wrong because I'm not immersed in it like you are, but I don't think a lot of people really even were aware that, oh, this is something that needs to happen in the levels that we as a society were aware into the summer of 2020.
Yeah. Well, we started it as an extension of a business, not a business itself. And so, I think there were a lot of organizations that did prioritize and knew that they needed a practice around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but there certainly wasn't the urgency that came after the murder of George Floyd and others where their employees, their clients, their customers were saying, we want you to respond. Because historically, companies don't respond to, things around politics, things around religion. There are those off limits topics that after that, they said, no, we want to talk about this. We want to talk about mental health, during this pandemic. And so there was a call again from employees, clients, consumers to say, we want to hear from you. And I think that's when our business really exploded.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did you see that the companies wanted to respond? What was their take on the response? Were they hesitant, or were they just like, yes, let's just go in it. We're all in this.
People in general they really want to speak, but then there's this obstacle of just this fear of saying the wrong thing, right? And what if it lands
That's
wrong?
right.
And how do I match what I want to say with my intention? Which is always a leadership worry. It's just a communicator worry, a professional worry. But in this moment where you're called on to make a statement and make it quick, right?
Yeah.
There's so much anxiety about getting it wrong, about offending when you mean to support.
I know. I mean, even today, and like with our current events, even with regards to gun control and the recent, school shooting here in Uvalde in Texas, it's been a thing. I mean, I forgot the name of the coach, how he came up and just spoke, like he spoke with his heart. I think it was in California. I can't remember his name. He was in California.
Steve Kerr.
Yes. I mean, I'm just like, yes, thank you. We just needed one person who could just kind of speak from the heart, totally unrehearsed, unwritten. It was just like, okay, call to action, hurry up and do something because this is ridiculous. And I think just how you were saying, how people expect responses now. They expect that responsibility coming out of companies that are so ever so involved in, their household products or brands, and they're representing us essentially, even though they're not elected officials. And so they're taking that accountability into their own hands as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love your mention that they're representing us. I don't think I think of it that way very often, but it's so true that we're so often told so much of our power in the world is our purchasing power and our consumer spending, right? And so knowing where to put that in a way that really drives the world you want to create is important. And they do represent us in this really indirect way.
They do. And, a lot of times we don't realize how much companies are actually involved behind the scenes politically also. And so if we as consumers can see through that and show our expectations and our standards, then perhaps even maybe behind the scenes politically, they can make those changes as well.
Absolutely. That's certainly the hope. Certainly the hope, right?
Let's talk a little bit more about the way you are helping other companies create language and a space that is welcoming for everybody, but then also not just, I mentioned this earlier, also, I just feel like sometimes these words can become buzzwords and they're hot topics, they're trendy, and sometimes they get forgotten after some time, right? Like I feel like even with school shootings, they get forgotten. They're hot for the moment, and then the next one happens and then it becomes hot again, but nothing really happens. So how do we create change with regards to even diversity and inclusion? How do we do that? And how do we maintain it and sustain it?
It's a practice. It's something that you're not going to get to check off, right? You're not going to get to completion. You're not going to get to perfection. Calling it a practice is something that we do because it's a reminder that it's something that we're always working towards. And, it's the journey. It's tough to change the way that you behave, change the way that you think. And it's really about being intentional and committing to it. With regard to inclusive language specifically, you really have to dig into listening to yourself talk, I think is the best place to start there, because you'll hear things that you begin to question. Like, I've said this thing since I was a child, right? Or I say this because I grew up in this area. And when you start listening to yourself and hearing yourself and saying, why do I say that? Or is that inclusive? Or what does that mean? Those are the things that you can do for yourself that helps you get into the practice of inclusive language. And then just being intentional about how you're responding to people, and are you giving people space to be themselves and to contribute to conversations and contribute to the success of an organization.
Mm-hmm. And we really prioritize action and actionable takeaways in a way that I'm really proud of. I love that about our team, that it isn't enough to kickstart change, right? But how do you maintain momentum? And in a lot of ways, inclusive language and DEI as an organizational function are a bit like starting to exercise or starting a new diet or starting any new habit, right? It stinks for a little while. It's hard. And
That's right.
You start to question if it's worth it. And then once it becomes a real habit, you're maintaining momentum in a way that starts to feel good, and you're starting to see a little bit of result, and it makes a difference. And so in our content, in our engagements, we really try to break down like, okay, here are the first few steps to take until you're starting to feel a little more inspired to kick off those next, like step 4, 5, 6, all on your own.
Okay. And so I know I was earlier talking, I say you guys all the time because from the Northeast,
Yes,
and again, like
absolutely.
how you just pointed that, it's like, you're coming from a geographical place and you say a certain thing. And so that is something I say. And it's funny because a lot of times my audience is just women. And so I say it and I'm like, women, like you guys, and I'm saying it so generically. Like I know I'm not saying it with the intention of men, right? Like I'm saying it with the intention of what I learned it as the colloquial way of generic, general, all-encompassing.
Me too. Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes for me, and I'm going to be brutally honest, is I'm a very inclusive person. I know I am, but at the end of the day, sometimes these words do come out, and it's then in my brain, I'm trying to reconcile it because I know I'm not saying it from a place of exclusivity. I know I'm not saying it from a place of, well, men are better than women, and therefore I will say guys, or, I'm just saying it very generically.
Yeah.
And so help me understand why I shouldn't say it.
Jackie, you should definitely talk to this because this is your weakness sometimes too.
Right.
And I will say, in the 18 months that I've worked with you, you used to slip it in every once in a while, and then you'd immediately apologize and say, I'm working on that. And now I almost never hear you say it.
Yeah.
Well done.
Thank you. And, I'm going to say I'm from upstate New York, and we say you guys all the time.
Wow.
And so that was a tough one for me to break because it's just natural. It comes out. But when you think about using genderless language for the many genders that exist, you want people to feel that sense of belonging, and they can, in that simple thing, feel excluded, feel like they're not a part of what's happening, and you'd want to avoid that. And so for me, it just was practice and then hearing it. And a quick story, we were creating a video on inclusive language specifically. And I ended the conversation of going through the video for it. Thanks, guys. Right. And then I'm like, I'm doing inclusive language stuff right now, and I messed it up right now. But, it's just practice. And the more you listen to yourself and then correct yourself in the moment, the better you'll get. And it really took me about a year to work myself out of it to where I rarely say it now. But that was a tough one. I tripped over that again and again and again. And, that's part of the journey, because you're going to have a hard time with some of those things that you've said since you were a child, but being intentional about it. And part of it is just acknowledging it and apologizing. So yeah, that was a tough one for me to break in particular.
It is really tough. And I mean, imagine I was born in DC area. So I moved from there to here when I was 12, and it's still with me. Here people say y'all. I cannot say y'all for my life. Like it just pains me when I say it. Like, I don't know why. I can say you all, but I can't say y'all. Like it just, I don't know why. And I mean, I love Houston, I love Texas, but I don't know why. But I think I'm going to start shifting to that.
It's inclusive.
It is so inclusive.
It's so inclusive and so grammatically like against everything.
Oh, it hurts
Right.
my ears.
So yeah, I was raised in a household where like that was basically a naughty word. We weren't allowed to say y'all or ain't. My parents were like, no, we don't do those words. Those are not real words. And now I say it all the time because it's so inclusive and it's such an easy replacement for what I want to say, which is guys. So I'll say, yeah, y'all are da 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 all the time. And I hear myself and think like, my poor mother tried so hard.
But I want to kind of stick on this for just a little second more, because I feel like, right now I see like layers of generations and layers of people who have just been fixed in a certain way, and they may or may not change because it's just maybe too late now for them. But how do you explain this rationale? Because I know that you mentioned it's not about what we grew up in. It's not about the intention that we're speaking with. It's more about how somebody perceives it and how they feel. Yeah. And so that's what we're actually focusing on. A lot of times I know I have justified you guys by saying, well, I don't mean it that way. Like it's generic, and if people knew from the Northeast, everybody knows what I'm saying over there. It's not just like some random thing. And so it's kind of shifting that focus on intent versus perception and feelings of your audience.
Yeah. How's it going to land?
Yeah.
In that perception, I think and I don't want to incite fear, but I do want to say a thing, which is that like often you just don't know what's going to offend someone. And I think there are so many examples of that are easy to pull out, but like often we use metaphorical language that says like in this flood of work, right? That seems so inoffensive to me. Like I have a flood of work to get done this week. Mm-hmm. However, let's say I'm someone who lost their home in a flood. Life was somehow like majorly impacted by a flood. Just that casual use would really get under my skin. And under my skin, now I'm going to have to look that one up, right? The little metaphors that we slide in because they're sort of natural to us. Like we don't know we know what our intention is. Our intention is casual. Our intention is probably thoughtless and harmless. And on the other end, we have no idea how it's going to land. And that's the impetus behind like really looking hard at what you say to figure out what's relevant and what's real. What did you really mean to say before you said it? And, Jackie should probably speak about fixing your mistake. Everybody's going to make hundreds. And for me, it's metaphors. I use lots of metaphors and then think, I don't know how that landed. How often do I need to apologize? How do I apologize? Will people forgive me?
Okay, but as an English major, as somebody, as us who have studied English and probably done AP English and language and arts and all that stuff, that's all you learn. You learn talking in metaphors. You learn writing in metaphors. You learn compare the extremeness of something or the lack of extremeness of something with comparisons. And so it's kind of like built into our systems and even in our reading, the books that we read. And so where is the fine line? Is there a fine line, number one? And then how do you figure it out? The fine line of being so unnecessarily sensitive, maybe? I don't know how to say it.
Flippant. Yeah.
Versus you got to be careful about this one. I feel like I get what you're saying about the flood. We're in Houston. Like we literally, my entire water during Harvey. I get it. It was terrible. And actually I have been offended, but not because someone used it as a metaphor, but someone was just like, oh, they just get overly excited and it's PTSD. And I was just like, oh my gosh, clearly we're not part of this.
Yeah, right.
That was a direct attack, but I'm talking about
direct attack. Yeah, it's tricky, right? Like everyone's going to have a different line. Is it a fine line or is it a thick line? And I think just the takeaway is to practice and raise your own awareness, be sensitive to it. Yeah. I will say sometimes I still hear other people speak in metaphors that like, as an English major and just a lover of words in general, like make me sweat. I love that metaphor so much. Yeah. On a recent webinar of ours, panelists used the term, and here I was crying out to the crater, which is that like crying out to the void kind of thing, right? I was like, oh, it's so beautiful. And it's so like, I know exactly what that feeling is because of her beautiful metaphor. And then I sat down and thought like, is that one? Yeah, that's probably inclusive. We're probably okay with that one. Every situation is different, I guess. Jackie.
That's right. The most important thing to remember is, all of us have been offended by someone that we're talking to, whether in the workplace or in our personal lives, and how that sits with us for a portion of the day, or sometimes all day, sometimes multiple days. And we're upset or angry or saddened or frustrated. And what we want to do with our language and being intentional about it is try to avoid that for people as much as we can, because it can ruin your day when someone unintentionally says something that brings back a bad memory, or, you know, you're personally offended by. And so just, you know, understanding some of the parameters and rules or best practices, however you'd like to describe it, is important, in just making sure that you're avoiding that for people as much as you can.
I also think it just doesn't only live with, or, you know, race or gender. It can also be, you know, recently I was at a conference, and this, one of the women that I was speaking there, she was talking about, you know, talking about other people's disabilities, but us using it as a metaphor, right? Like, I was paralyzed in fear or something like that. Now, that's so commonly used in books and, you know, people speaking, but people who are truly paralyzed may not love that metaphor, actually. And I get it. And so I've been actually very thoughtful about, even with regards to this, is the way we speak with regards to other health conditions that could be potentially out there, and how we apply it to ourselves in a way that is just absolutely diminishing what they're actually going through.
Absolutely.
And it can be super hurtful, I think, in that sense also.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
especially language around mental health, I think is really common to draw in and use metaphorically. And I will say there's a long period of my life through college and later where I would have described myself as like super OCD, right? Until, yeah. And I would, like, again, I would write it off. I would never say that about someone else, but I'm saying it about me. But like, also I'm not, period. Like, I just like things tidy. And I will say, back to the point of being an English major who loves metaphors in general, I think the call to action in inclusive language for me was say what you mean. And
I love that. Say what you mean. Actually,
and it's a charge, right? It's very, am I not clever enough to think of a different way to say this in a way that will land well with almost everyone? Because the actual thing I want to say is part of what's important. But what's also important is making sure that the other people who are receiving it, whether or not it's written or spoken, understand it and will continue reading it, right? And so removing myself, you spoke a little bit about this already, but removing myself and my sort of selfishness in wanting to communicate was really helpful to me in thinking like, oh, I would actually like someone to read this.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how you just said, say what you mean. And, you know, kind of prior to us getting on the call, we were talking about our children and how they actually are far more aware than we are in certain areas.
Absolutely.
And just with regards to OCD, like, you know, the other day we were in a family setting and some family members were like, oh yeah, you know, this person and I are like super OCD about cleaning. My daughter actually corrected them. I didn't even know this was coming out of her mouth. She's like, you're not.
I love that.
OCD means this. Now, you may be particular, but you're not OCD. OCD is a problem, a mental health problem. I'm like, oh my God, she's 10. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And then I was
crushing
like,
it.
okay, let me go support her. I started like,
That's amazing.
Pat on the back for that one.
I mean, I didn't think of correcting it because I was like, whatever, we're in a family setting. You know, again, you're like, it's okay. What am I going to do by correcting? How's it going to, because sometimes when you're correcting, that correction can be taken incorrectly also.
Right.
That's true.
It can cause friction, a lot of friction that you just may not want to be in at the moment. But then when this child who is 10 years old says something, it's not causing friction. It's just like, okay, it's like I've been hit by a big rock right now. And, you know, it's like awareness rock that just hit me. So,
good for her.
Yeah. And I was really proud of her. And then, you know, I also was like, that's great because mental health is an issue. And now back in the day, we didn't really discuss those things. It was always considered to be whatever, you know, they're being too extra or they're being just too much. And now I'm glad science has come out more and, you know, doctors, everybody's talking about it, which is really nice. And even kids are aware of it because their counselors talk to them in school. They're aware of these issues. And then at least in the school that they go to, they talk about these things so that it's out in the open and it's not something that kids have to hide from.
Yeah, that's great.
Kind of shifting gears a little bit, going back to the tangible actions, Roxanne, that you were talking about earlier. If there's a small business out there, because I know you go and talk to corporations, you talk to bigger companies, I'm thinking, So small businesses out there, they're like, you know what, we really want to make some changes in our way of doing business. And, for small businesses, they might have a team of maybe 3, 4, or even maybe like, 25, 30 people. But how do they make change in their company, whether it's through internal or external changes also? But what are some tangible tips that you could give to them?
I mean, without sounding salesy, I think our brand new book, the Inclusive Language Handbook, is a really great start. And the beauty of the book is that it gives these actionable tips, and it really gets you thinking about your language. And language as the foundation for culture is universal. It doesn't matter if you have 2 employees or 2,000 employees. The way that you communicate is going to set the tone. And the book contains these like really cool workbook elements we're really proud of. So you're basically practicing within the book, and there's just a safe space to fail. Our CEO, Donald Thompson, calls it practice without penalty, which I just love.
I love that.
So when you're doing that in a safe space, and I'll let Jackie speak to more organizational elements. I think she's our expert there.
Well, I'll be putting the link to your book in the show notes as well.
The only thing that I would add is just, it's important to understand that no matter how big your company is, you can intentionally build the culture that you want from employee one. And so if having a culture of belonging and inclusion is important to you as a founder, then you'll start building those things in. And language is one of the easiest things to do because that's just a personal decision. And not easy, but simple, I think is the right word, right? It's a simple thing that you can do, but it's not easy. It takes work. It takes practice. It takes mistakes and trying again. But, that language is the easiest thing that you can do. And it doesn't take a lot of investment. Right? Some of the things that you do with measurement and all of the, lots of things that we offer through the diversity movement, you can make those shifts just on your own with some good guidelines about how you're speaking to people. And communication is the foundation of culture and the foundation of relationships as well. So that's a great place to start. There are also some wonderful resources that you can find that are free, either through the diversity movement or some other organizations as well. But just being intentional about seeking out more information, ways to educate yourself, ways to be, more respectful, create more safe spaces is the most important thing.
Yeah. I like that. So language, obviously that is where it starts, the words that you're using. And even when you're speaking to your employees, but even, when we're also hiring people in our
Absolutely.
teams. And this is actually a real question for me also that I have, and I still have this question. I feel like when I'm hiring or when I'm whatever, I'm looking more at merits, and my conversations are really based on the resume, on what I'm seeing and things like that. They're not really based on anything else, quite frankly. And then also like if their values are aligned to the values of my company, and, if we're in alignment in that sense. Now, if I know in bigger corporations, they have a lot more protocol that they need to follow in order to ensure that they're not showing any type of discrimination or while in the hiring process. So I've seen my friends who are executives and companies where they're like, we have to ask all the same questions. We have to, do certain things that just kind of fit the bill right. But small businesses don't really do all of that all the time. And sometimes those questions can be absolutely different for all, potential candidates. So what are some, like, if you have any tips on, when you're also hiring somebody, like what should the focus be on, and how can we avoid getting ourselves into some place that we don't want to be in with regards to discrimination with regards to that?
Or setting up a culture.
Or setting up a culture, yeah.
The bottom line that turns out to not be the thing you were after, right?
Yeah.
So if we have advice, made me chuckle because this is like inclusive hiring and, how DEI can integrate into startups is just our jam.
Yeah.
We probably have too many tips. And I would say one I'll speak to is really looking at your job descriptions for whether or not the language is correct and really what you mean. And a lot of what you just talked about is just correct. Like culture addition instead of a culture fit really helps you look at value alignment instead of whether or not somebody fits with the culture of your firm, which can just lead to homogeneity, right? And also look for people in lots of diverse places. If you're only looking in the same few places, you're only going to find the same few people over and over again.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I actually just like the fact of your job description being inclusive, because I'm thinking about like, okay, I feel like my NARP, I'm going to go back and reevaluate. But I like that how also look in different places and not just on your Facebook groups or, well, Facebook groups, that's where people are really posting, or LinkedIn is where they're posting also.
Right. True. Well, and I'll say Jackie just renovated our entire internal hiring process to match up with our best practices that we teach to organizations. And so her work there has been really insightful in leading us to teach better to our clients.
Yeah. So inclusive hiring is really important. I think a lot of companies are going there too. And in fact, a lot of small businesses, I mean, I work with a lot of creative entrepreneurs. So, when I mean small businesses, I'm not meaning like $1 million necessarily, but they're really like photographers and event planners. They're earning well, but they're not in the $1 million small business range either.
Yeah.
And they're sometimes even for and I don't want to say optics because they're truly intentionally trying to make a difference, but just even the photographs that they're using on their website, and they want them to be theirs. And so they're very intentionally going out and taking photographs of probably individuals that normally they don't take of, because generally they only have a specific demographic that comes to them because that's what the message is through their photographs even.
Yeah. And I think it's important to be authentic.
Yes.
Right. I think one of the issues is that when you have a homogenous website, for example, you say, oh, I need to have more diversity on my website. But, really expand who you're reaching out to, where you're advertising your services, so that you can just naturally gain more diversity among your clients, so that that's authentic. Because there's a difference with photographers specifically, and the ones who are there and really engaged with you and engaged with your event, rather than the staged, pictures that they're doing to make sure there's diversity on their site. But I think that applies across any industry. You want to make sure that where you're advertising, where you're looking for your customers, your talent, it's varied, because, so often we go to our own networks, which usually look a lot like us. And, being intentional about expanding that, what that looks like, reaching out to other places, I think is important there.
So true. So true. And, just while we were talking, I was thinking like, we have the internal part of our business that we need to look into, which is how the corporate culture, inclusive hiring, and also just the way we speak with one another, the expectations that we have, but then also our customers, our clients, how are we engaging with them? Who are we engaging with? And then another bracket would probably be also other businesses that we're working with and collaborating with, and, whether they're vendors or however we're working with them. And so is there any other area that the big bucket area that a business would need to look at in order to kind of be like, okay, this is another space where we need to make sure that we're covering our grounds in sort of a fashion, or, when they're taking action to be inclusive?
Absolutely. Going up to board level and investors. Yes. That's another area where it's going to matter, because for potential employees, for current employees, for clients, they're looking all the way up your ranks, right? So if your diversity stops at middle management, a person who is culturally diverse is saying, well, there's clearly a cap on how far I can go with this organization. But if that diversity goes all the way up to your board level, and then investors now are looking for more competency in diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it creates sustainable business, and investors want to invest in businesses that are sustainable.
I love that. Thank you for bringing that. I absolutely that. And that's why I asked you, because And, you know, I think I'm just going to go back to the whole authentic part of it also. I do feel like we can't be disingenuous to our businesses. And plus, say you're from a small town and that's all you do. All you do is that small town photography. And then all of a sudden, you just bring in some random pictures that don't go with. That's not being authentic either. And so then people can feel that, like you said, people can actually see that and feel that. And so, what other ways for that one business could they be showing diversity in their business where they are showing, hey, listen, I'm maybe just doing these type of demographics, but I do welcome others. And so would it be, how would they show that?
As you were saying it, I was like, exactly what you just said. If you have a really homogenous team, right? How do you attract diversity when you can't authentically photograph your team, when you're at ground level and you're saying, we really care about diversity, but it hasn't been exhibited yet in your team.
Accessible,
right?
where we are, or, you know, whatever.
Right. Right. Yeah. And the advice we usually give people is say exactly that, right? We're learning and here's what we're doing. Here are the concrete ways we're learning. We're taking such and such course, or we're doing this executive training, or we committed to read this particular book and do a book club, or we are using diverse suppliers. So who are your accountants? Who's running your payroll for you? Who's your legal team? Where can you find diversity that isn't necessarily in your employee base? And it's okay to have a picture of your real team and say like, hey, this isn't who we want to be next year. This isn't who we want to be in 10 years. And that sort of vulnerability is really scary. So to just name that, like, I'm not doing really very well yet, but I want to do better.
I love that, because this is truly a question. This question comes from the questions I have received from other clients or groups of people in the entrepreneur world, because a lot of times they want to do it. They just don't know how to do it in a way that's authentic, in a way that makes sense. But then again, it's just being vulnerable and just saying what you mean. Like how you said earlier, it's like, you know, I love that. Like, this is who we are today, but this is what we want to be in the future.
And get to work, like preparing the place to be inclusive when that first employee from a different demographic joins you, right? So that when you finally entice them to be part of your team, they don't feel like an only or an other the whole time.
I was an only too for the longest time in my school. Yeah. I was the only Indian in my private school that I went to, but I loved it. It wasn't bad at all. Like I didn't feel different or anything in the sense of anybody's words, right? And if there were questions ever asked, I always use them as teaching moments, even though sometimes people could have, and they were young. Like when I, came here, I was 12. And so I actually had someone ask me, what tribe are you from? And I'm like, oh my gosh, what does that even mean? And then I'm like, oh, okay. And I played around with them for a little bit. And I'm like, listen, I'm Indian. I'm from like my parents are from India. My heritage is Indian, but I'm American. And, that whole conversation. But anyways.
Yeah. That's a whole other.
Can we talk about this for 1 second, and then I'm going to just like go from something else. When somebody says to me, like, I feel like this question always comes to me. It's like, where are you from? I'm like, what do you mean? Do I ask you that question? Like, do I ask you where you're from? I mean, unless I'm saying, where are you located? Where are you based out of? Because I'm just wondering what state you're sitting in right now. But otherwise, I'm not like, where are you from? Right. But I always get that question. And so I feel like a lot of times I have to go into that whole conversation of, well, my heritage is Indian. My parents are from India. I'm Indian, but I'm American. Like I'm born in DC. Why do I have to do all of that? And so that actually is something that kind of annoys me sometimes. And so how do I answer that in a way where I'm pretty like precise in one answer and not going through the whole background information of my life?
That's certainly something that a lot of people have to deal with in the United States specifically because of the assumptions that people make about who people are, where they're from. And that is one of the questions that gets asked more than it should be. I would just say, I'm American. I'm from DC. Right. And stop.
I cannot, because they're looking at me like,
And then once in a while you get
what you wanted.
Where are you
really from?
Oh, happy Immigrant Heritage Month. I imagine people are going to hear that.
I even had somebody ask me, what are you? I'm like, what is that? I'm a woman. Like, I'm a woman. What kind of a stupid question?
Wow. So what we do on the backside, yeah, I don't know. What am I? We try to teach people that the question they should be asking is,
please tell me that.
Would you mind if I asked your ethnicity? Or would you mind if I asked where your ancestors are from? Or what's your heritage? Or things like that. Yes. And don't ask that question unless it's actually relevant to the conversation. Otherwise, you're just calling someone out for looking slightly different than you.
Yes.
It sounds like hi, I'm the white lady on the call. Don't often get that question.
Exactly.
But it exhausts me when I hear it from both of you, from lots of friends, that I just think, oh, they want to know, like, where were your ancestors from and where were you from before that? And then how did you get to here? And like, why are you here? Right. And that's hard. That's so burdensome.
Yeah. I think if it's a natural progression of the conversation, that's totally different. But if it's one of the first few questions, and that just kind of, it's an exhausting answer for me. I don't know why. I mean, it's just, anyways, just wanted to bring that out there. And before we wrap it up, I had a few other questions. One of them is, I know this was law chat, so we always like to talk a little bit about the law, but I'm going to kind of give a little twist to this because I know that you do not deal with legal compliance. I know that, but I wanted to know if, with regards to law and the legal aspect, what are some, if you have any, or suggestions on how to work around that legal aspect when it comes to HR or when it comes to the diversity and HR?
Well, I mean, starting with like, what are your compliance requirements, right? So you have to know your affirmative action and EEO, equal opportunity requirements around compliance. And then how do you build on that? Primarily by communicating internally that that's not what DEI is. This is not about compliance. This is about genuinely creating a culture and an environment where every single person that we bring in knows that they're valued and respected and expected to contribute really great work, and that we're going to get them the tools they need to do that. Is very separate from that sort of quota-based, we're covering our legal bases. Diversity beyond the checkbox is the name of Jackie's podcast and the name of our foundational course. And it really draws out that separation, right? The compliance element is the checkbox. Are you checking all of those? And moving to your diversity, equity, and inclusion past that thinking is really important.
I think that's so brilliant, diversity beyond the checkbox, because when you're just aligning with the checkbox, your space is not inclusive. You're just kind of doing what you have to do and moving forward. And like how you said, Roxanne, creating an environment that's welcoming and supportive to everybody. And it may not be to that checkbox person at that time. But yes, there are some check boxes for different industries and the requirements for different industries. So please do check what those compliances are for your business and industry.
Absolutely. Here's the one thing that I would add is just, if you're prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're coming so far past that compliance piece. And so you have to worry less about, I didn't get the job because of my identity, when you've got a whole process in place as to how to interview inclusively, right? And so if you're so far past that, you don't even have to think about the compliance piece because you're at a whole different level, and the compliance just comes.
Okay. I love what you just said for many reasons. One is because you have made the process part of the corporate culture. It's like the lifestyle of your company, which That's I love. Two, processes, when they're written, they're recorded, they're part of your normal business practice. It means a lot in court. Normal business practice is like evidentiary awesomeness, because then you can actually say, this is what we normally do. And there's no two ways about it. And when you show consistent pattern, there's no two ways about it. And so it becomes like this prima facie acceptance of this is what happens. And there's generally no questions about it. And I love that. And I also, when I'm working with my clients, it's about creating legal strategies within your company to mitigate issues in the future. So it's not just like putting a Band-Aid on and saying, okay, now what can we fix? It's really starting from the root and integrating law in such a way, like how you're saying, it's integrating that process already into your business. So you're avoiding all those issues because you've really covered your grounds from the beginning, and you're not scraping and running and chasing after it. So I love what you just said. Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So I know that you have a book coming out and I'm so excited. When does it come out?
It's out.
Okay.
We're so excited.
Putting links in. I'm getting it myself. Is it available on Amazon? Where do we get them?
Absolutely. Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And then you can also go to the inclusivelanguagehandbook.com and get the book, get lots of additional free resources that help you get started in your inclusive language practice.
Awesome. And the name of the book is?
The Inclusive Language Handbook, a guide to better communication and transformational leadership.
Love that. Okay. Well, I'll have the links to that in the show notes. Now, if somebody wanted to reach out to you and say, hey, how can you help me? Or, is there a program that you have offering? How do they reach out to you and connect with you?
They can connect through that same website or at info@thediversitymovement.com, or they can find us on LinkedIn as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. And before we say bye, I love asking this question because I think as entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs out there, we all have tough days. We have days that are just like, gosh, I just want to go back into my covers and watch TV all day. Do not disturb. What anchors you? What holds you steady when there's a lot of friction around you?
This is such a cheesy answer. I should probably say my family, but I think it's my team. Because my team at the Diversity Movement, which is our fairly robust content and marketing team, works so well together. And because we really have learned to live our values and practice what we preach or walk our talk or whatever metaphor you like, I really rely on those humans to get through the hard days. And I really enjoy being the sort of bubbly person in the room when they're having hard days who can pick up work for them. And the work we do is powerful and we're all passionate about it. And it's hard work and it's emotional work, but knowing that it really makes a powerful impact on the world is heartening, keeps me centered.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. So.
Oh, I love that. You're working in a good place.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Our team is amazing.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom today and helping us understand a little bit more about diversity and inclusion and how to actually make it a part of our corporate lifestyle. I think it's just so important and not just a, short fad type of a situation. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Law Chat. I hope this was super beneficial to you. I really enjoyed sharing this information with you today. And I have to ask you for a favor. Like I did in the beginning, I'm going to ask you again. Please share this with your community, whether it's a friend, family, or another colleague, or someone else on your Facebook or Instagram or other social media spot. Share this, subscribe, and stay tuned for other episodes coming in so you are always up to date. But then also take another moment and share this episode with your community, because when you share it with everybody else, not only are they benefiting, but also the information that I'm sharing is reaching out to more people, because at the end of the day, we want to rise together with our community, and I can only do that with your help. Now, I am so grateful for you. I'm so grateful that you tuned in, and I want to hear from you as well. So shoot me a DM on Instagram at GVP Law or at Law Chat with Girja. I would love to hear from you. I would love to also hear what other episodes that you would like to hear about, topics that you want to hear about, and also just connect with you. And thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, cheers.